He lost the lead at the start, he took it back, then he roared off into the distance. Lando Norris showed that right now, he and McLaren are the fastest team in Formula One.
At the house that Max rebuilt, the winner's orange once again, but this time he's driving a McLaren. Lando Norris wins the Dutch Grand Prix with a crushing performance. And the bonus point for fastest lap. The gap in the World Championship is 70 points. Norris taking a second career win.
Simply lovely, huh?
Formula One is back, and we're back in the paddock here at Zandvoort after a statement victory from McLaren's Lando Norris in the Dutch Grand Prix. It's McLaren's third win of the season, but it was by far the most dominant. What does that mean for the rest of the season? Let's find out. Welcome to F1 Nation. I'm Tom Clarkson, and we have F1.com editor Greg Stuart with us, and brand new Red Bull sim racing driver, two-time F1 esports champion and former F4 and Formula Renault driver Jarno Opmeer. This is his home race. He was born not too far away from this very racetrack. Guys, welcome to the show. Jarno, let's start with you. What did you make of the race?
In the beginning, it was exciting with strategy, but I think after like 40 laps, it started to be a bit more quiet. And then I think at that point, all strategies had kind of settled down. Mercedes tried quite ambitious strategy. And at some point, I thought maybe they could catch like Checo and Sainz back up. But yeah, I think softs were probably not the best race tire to be on. So, yeah.
Greg, how did you see it?
Some races are battles and some races are chess matches, and this was a bit of a chess match. I think if the car in front had been wearing Jarno's colours, we might have been going, oh, that was another race of dominance from Max Verstappen. But the fact that it's a McLaren, it's Lando Norris, means that it's all to play for in drivers and constructors championships now.
Well, let's hear now from the top two, the title rivals, starting with our race winner.
Obviously didn't start in the most optimistic way, but the pace was unbelievable from the beginning, and I could go with Max quite happily at the start. I just didn't expect our pace to be probably as good as what it was today, which is a good thing. It's nice to be kind of a little bit surprised by this, and as soon as I got ahead, it was quite straightforward. I could push. I had good confidence to push the whole race, save the tyres a little bit, but just get in a good rhythm and go from there. So car felt amazing. Car felt great, and made my life easier for sure. So big thanks to the team.
Zandvoort hasn't been the happiest of hunting grounds for McLaren in recent seasons. Just how much have these upgrades lifted the performance?
I mean, this weekend a little bit. I still feel like we probably would have won without the upgrades this weekend. The upgrades didn't make us suddenly a lot quicker here, you know, but the upgrades we've been putting on the car, they've helped us every time. It's not like we put it on and questioned it. We put it on and it was just did everything it wanted to do and needed to do and was meant to do. So we've taken our time, and this was our first upgrade since Miami. And this was our first time we really put something on the car to drive us a step forward. And today, with how the car felt, I'm sure it was a step ahead. You know, a new rear wing probably helped me get past Max today. So little things like that definitely help you go forwards.
So Lando, phenomenal pace here. What does this mean going forward? Let's talk about Monza next weekend. Do you think you'll be as competitive there?
I have no idea. You ask us questions like we're meant to know. I got no idea. Yeah, anyone could be on top. Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull, us. Ferrari were quite quick today. We probably didn't expect them to be as good as they were. Maybe Red Bull struggled a bit more. I think that was probably more the factor that the Red Bull struggled a bit more today than we were expecting. So we just keep our heads down. There's no point thinking how we're going to do next weekend. We'll just get there and work hard and wait till we get there. There's no point thinking ahead.
Very well done today. Good luck next weekend. Max, let's come to you now. So you struggled more than Lando was expecting today. Did you struggle more than you were expecting today?
The whole weekend has been the same. I mean, I have pretty much the same balance from FP1 all the way to the race. I mean, the limitations are the same. So, it's just very hard to solve at the moment. Yeah, it just seems like we are too slow, but also quite bad on deck at the moment. So that's a bit weird because I think the last few years, normally we've been quite good on that. So something has has been going wrong lately with the car that we need to understand, and we need to of course quickly try to improve. Once he passed, I just focus on doing my race, try to bring it to the end in second.
Knowing the car's strengths and weaknesses as you do you think you'll be more competitive at Monza?
I don't know. I mean, we just need to figure out our balance issues. I think that will already help a lot also with DEG. Of course, in Monza, a lot is new. You know, tarmac, curbs, even the layout in turn 1, 2. So also that we need to, to understand a bit more. But yeah, we know that we have quite a bit of work to do.
I was surprised by the pace of McLaren. I think we knew the upgrade would work, but the pace to put 22 seconds on Max Verstappen was a surprise to me.
We've heard from Rob Marshall, people have been speaking to Rob Marshall, and he's been saying what he's been really impressed by since coming over to McLaren from Red Bull is that everything that they try out coordinates perfectly with the wind tunnel, with the simulations, so they know it's going to work. They put it on the car and it works. We saw it in Miami. They had that massive upgrade, which is effectively like a Spec B on the MCL 38. Didn't really upgrade the car since then, and then put it on the car, bang. Massive gap in qualifying, 0.356 seconds between Lando and Max, and then in the race just supreme pace to the point where yes, Lando maybe fluffed his lines at the start, or there was an issue with the starts from McLaren, but he admitted afterwards he wasn't worried. He knew he had the pace to get Max and ended up winning by over 22 seconds.
Jarno, were you surprised by the pace of your car, the RB20?
I think it was just very much the McLarens that were very far ahead of everyone else. It's not, I think, necessarily that the RB20 was really, really slow, because obviously still finished ahead of Ferrari and Mercedes. So yeah, it's a difficult one. McLaren clearly got the upper hand, right? Pole by 3.5 tenths on a relatively short circuit, 4.3 kilometers. Yeah. It's impressive, and of course they showed before as well, or the RB20 showed before as well, it's not going to be great on street circuits. Monaco was not great, so Singapore and Baku coming up is going to be questionable as well, I think so. But then, yeah, Spa looked good for Max, so maybe in Monza he will be up there again. But we're just going to have to wait and see. I think no one can really predict exactly what's going to happen, of course. But yeah, it's going to be a very difficult rest of the year if Lando starts, being faultless now. I think in the past few races he's struggled a little bit with confidence. But if he starts going on a roll now with the pace they have, McLaren, then it's going to be very, very difficult to stop them in the championship and the rest of the year. So
how much confidence will Lando Norris have taken from that performance today?
A lot. I mean, the start was obviously still not great. I'm not sure if that's a car issue or if both drivers just struggled or made a mistake.
But I think both drivers said after the race that they both had wheel spin.
Yeah, I remember I was watching up top of the building, the starts, and there was a big waiting time for the last car to line up, and I saw Max be a lot more aggressive on his way to the grid, so maybe that had something to do with it. Max being more aggressive with the burnouts, had more tire temperature, so yeah, if it was wheel spin, maybe they dropped the clutch too much with slightly too much throttle input, but could also have been
really interesting you say that, because Max then put quite a margin on Lando very quickly on that opening lap or two, probably before Lando's tyres were fully up to temperature. So it all stacks up what you're saying about the burnout.
Yeah, and especially around here where I think front left suffers the most out of all four tyres. Of course, I think you get away with doing a few extra burnouts as the balance will naturally go more and more understeery throughout the race. So yeah, it's not as hurtful to do a few extra burnouts, especially on a track where track positioning is crucial. Didn't matter too much today in the end because McLaren and Lando had that upper hand. But yeah, it was a great start. So yeah.
I thought, Tom, it was also interesting what Max was saying in the press conference to you, that they seem to be suffering with the RB20 with a bit more deg than they were used to. So it all sort of tallies that the McLaren is able to look after its tyres, and then also the fact that he's on very used hards, Lando, by the end, and pumps in on the last lap, the fastest lap of the race, beating Lewis Hamilton's previous soft tyre fastest lap. So, Jarno, you've probably seen the data on it, but it seems that the McLaren in its current state can just look after its tyres, maybe more than the RB20.
Yeah, and it's going to be very important for tracks like Singapore as well, where they're going to be running the softest compounds. Here we're running the hardest compounds available. Obviously, you need it as well for all the high-speed corners around here. But on tracks where you're going to be struggling even more on tyre wear, today was a clear one-stop, of course. Then that's going to be an even bigger advantage. So again, might be very track specific, but having better tyre wear always is a huge advantage, because even if your car is 2-3 tenths slower, you will eventually catch back up. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that's going to play out. But I think Max was really struggling there in the last few laps relative to Lando. Was probably just managing as well because they had that pace advantage. But yeah, he clearly had a lot left in the end, and probably the gap could have been bigger if Lando pushed the wall away. And not to forget as well that Lando was quite a few laps behind Max. It's not just that he pulled a 22-second gap throughout the race. It was, after lap 20, I think so, or something, until lap 72 where that happened.
2024 is all about championship number 4 for Max. How worried do you think he is right now? I mean, the gap to Lando is 70 points. Coming into this race, I firmly believed that the 78-point advantage he had prior to this race was enough for him to be able to sort of manage the gap. Do you think he's worried now?
I think worried is a big word, but as I said earlier on, if Lando does start going on a roll and starts winning every race, then it's going to be difficult to stop him, especially, if Max gets a little bit unlucky in like an incident. Of course, the same can happen for Lando. But I think a few races ago, people thought this championship was wrapped up, and I think it's not that black and white. I think Vettel in 2010 was really, really far behind, managed to get back in the last race. So it is something to a little bit worry about. But in the end of the day, Max will know this as well. He can just do the most he can. And today that was P2 clearly. So, yeah.
I think that gap to Vettel, I think he was 15 points behind going into Abu Dhabi 2010.
Well, maths is not my strong suit, but...
My memory's not mine. That's off the top of my head. But
yeah, I think it will be hard for Lando to close this down. Will McLaren end up ruining the Hungarian Grand Prix, where they didn't impose the team orders and create a lovely storyline by Oscar Piastri taking a race win? But would they have appreciated those points? We'll find out come the end of the season. As Jarno said, there are going to be some tracks where we've typically seen Red Bull struggle. I'm thinking particularly like Singapore in recent years. So there's chances for Lando to eat into the gap more than he did today. He took 8 points out of Max's lead today. But then similarly, will Lando have a few difficult races? Who knows? I think the constructors seems much more on a knife edge for Red Bull to retain it this year.
I'm not even sure it's a knife edge. I mean, I think at the minute, the pace of McLaren, the pace of both McLaren drivers, the gap is now down to 30. I think it's game on for McLaren in that championship. And I think how Red Bull respond is going to be fascinating. Helmut Marko told the media after this Grand Prix that he found the performance this weekend alarming and that something needs to happen quickly at Red Bull. So, Jarno, come on, give us some insight. When's the next upgrade coming? What do you know?
Well, I don't know much. I've been with the team since Wednesday, so I don't have that much insight. But he is right, of course, because I think Max did a good lap yesterday in Q3 and was still 3.5 tenths off. And it looks like quite a handful when I went on board in Q1 or Q2 to keep the car balanced. Although I think a lot of cars struggled with that this weekend. apart from McLaren. I think it's, of course, the trick is to get as much rotation as possible in the car without losing traction or losing consistency. And it just looks like McLaren, when you go on board, they've got a lot of rotation, but it's a very stable car as well, and it's very consistent as well. Where when I went on board in qualifying with the Ferraris or the Red Bull or the Aston, it looked a little bit all over the place, and they were all trying to keep it on track more than driving a fast lap.
I know you've only been at the team a few days, but can you tell us anything about Max's driving style? So he comes on the radio in this race and says, you know, the car is not responding to my inputs. I asked him in that press conference, does that mean you're getting too much oversteer? And he said there's a disconnection. I mean, how disconcerting is that for someone like Max when the car just isn't doing what you want it to do?
Yeah, it is frustrating, of course. And I think the frustrating part is when the car oversteers and understeers at the same time, you know, like when in the same corner you've got a lot of oversteer on entry and a lot of understeer mid-corner. That's just not what you want, because you can't push that way at all. You can't push on the entry, and then you can also not carry any speed because you're just understeering off wide. And that just ends up costing so much lap time because you can't push that way. And it eats the tires as well, not just the fronts or the rears, but both, because you're just sliding around all the time. So yeah, that balance issues that I think Ferrari had as well this weekend, and Red Bull had, that just cost a lot of lap time in the end. So yeah, perhaps it's not just a simple way of creating more downforce or less drag. It's actually a balancing issue, which, you know, could be solved within setup. But I guess that's what they've already tried for the past few races. So yeah.
Well, I think also the worrying thing for Red Bull will be that Max is known as a bit of a, I mean this in the nicest possible way, a bit of a freak in terms of the car balance that he can live with, and that's been the issue for his teammates who have come in. The car has maybe been more on a knife edge than people have assumed watching from the outside, and, you know, Alex Albon has said it, Pierre Gasly has said it, Sergio Perez hasn't been able to live with Max when the car has been particularly on a knife edge, and we've seen that especially in the run into the summer break. So if Max is now reaching the point where he's struggling to control this car, then that's a serious worry for the team, I imagine.
And I think that's what Marco was referring to probably in his comments. Look, before we move on from Red Bull, you mentioned Perez. P6 in the race was his best result since Miami, but he did drop from 5th on the grid. How do you assess his race weekend? How much did he need that? Was it enough?
It was better. It was better than we've seen recently. You would have liked to have seen him move forward. The Ferrari pace, which we might get to later, but that was a bit of a surprise, and he was surprised to fall back behind the Ferrari. The great move by Carlos Sainz on him. I think it would have steadied the ship for him. He's obviously had the variable of having a new race engineer this weekend as Hugh Bird gets ready to go on his paternity leave. Yeah, I think it would have steadied the ship, stopped the rot, and then with the upgrades that Helmut Marko has referenced, which in a way might be downgrades in the sense that they'll take the car out of the window it's been put into with the upgrade that was put on the car. Maybe we'll see Sergio start to refine his form, refine his speed, which is what Dr. Marko predicted would happen.
And he's always been good at Monza, Checo. I wonder whether Monza might come at a good time for him.
2012 in that Sauber that worked really nicely, he got on the podium.
It would be nice if he can get his confidence back. I think he just needed the race he had today, you know, just a stable weekend, no big mistakes, staying out of trouble. I think his pace was not bad as well. Baku coming up is a good track for him as well over the past few years, so it will be interesting to see if he can do well there again.
Let's move on to Ferrari, and before I hear from you guys, let's hear from Charles Leclerc in the press conference.
We were 9 tenths off yesterday, and suddenly pretty strong today. The car is exactly the same. Yesterday we've been struggling like crazy. Today we were strong. And these are the kind of things that we've got to work on. I think as much as we analyze every bad surprises we have during a season, we also need to understand when we do something good. For now, I don't think as a team we have the explanations. So it's a great result. I'm really happy to be standing on the podium, and I think it's a really good surprise. However, we've got to understand in order to perform more often at our best.
That was as good a Charles Leclerc, I think, as we've ever seen.
He was really good, and that was a really nice result for Ferrari. But as he said in the press conference, it's nice to have nice results, but it's nicer to know why you're having the nice results. And I think, as happy as they are, there's this head scratching going on of, well, hang on, how were we that off the pace all weekend? All weekend they've looked like the fourth fastest team at best. And then all of a sudden you find Charles Leclerc on the podium, which he'll be very happy with going into Monza, but they'll want to know and drill down into the data and be like, why could we get the car working that well today?
Yesterday they seemed nowhere. Especially Carlos was all over the place with the balance in qualifying, and then today in the race they did quite decent. They were perhaps a little bit surprised with it as well, but it does seem to be the case this year, or in this regulation, that a lot of teams tend to struggle with why they're slow, correlation issues, why upgrades are not working. I think in previous generations, or regulations I should say, we rarely saw upgrades fail that hard. I remember Haas having a time where they had upgrades that didn't work, but I don't remember it happening this often where teams brought upgrades and went backwards.
Everyone except McLaren really has suffered from that, haven't they?
Yeah, exactly. I think last year in 2023 already, they made a massive step. I remember Lando was really angry with preseason testing in Bahrain in 2023. And then they were midfield to pretty much last pace-wise. And then they brought a very big upgrade package to Silverstone, if I remember correctly. And they made a massive jump, and it seems like they've done the same again this year. After a few races, they brought an upgrade package and made another insane jump, and no other team seems to have been able to do that.
A lot rests on this upgrade that Ferrari are bringing to Monza. How confident can they be?
Well, I'm not sure. It's the fact that they're a bit flummoxed by the result today in Zandvoort means perhaps they're not too confident. Charles is begging for it. Both drivers are begging for it. To be in the car and for it to be bouncing, which is the issue that Charles and Carlos have been referring to, has to be incredibly unpleasant while at the same time taking performance out of the car. So he's just praying that this is the fix, because lest we forget that we've also got to pretty much carry these stable regulations into 2025. So everything they're putting on the car now has an effect on 2025. So when Charles lines up against Lewis Hamilton in 2025, he'll want to feel like Ferrari are on top of their problems and ready to maybe challenge for title glory in 2025, and not see Red Bull and McLaren duke it out between them, and maybe even Mercedes.
I think Ferrari are going to be nervous, because the last time we went to a track with long straights and chicanes and slow corners was Canada. And you remember Charles had just won at Monaco 2 weeks earlier, and we all thought he was going to go to Canada on a roll, and yet that whole Canada weekend was incredibly difficult for them. And I think a lot is going to rest on the upgrades. And I think if they have a good weekend in Monza, then they're probably set fair for the rest of this season, but we're only going to know in a week's time.
That's what they were predicting. They were predicting that would be a better race for them. And yeah, I think you're right. I think if that can work there, and, who knows, a bit of Nigel Mansell, Tifosi, a couple of tenths there as well. Yeah, it should be an easier run to the end of the season. But certainly it looks like, when Charles was winning in Monaco, when Carlos was winning in Australia, they're just looking to get back to that level now, and no one's really talking about them being in the constructors fight anymore, which is a shame for Ferrari, because it was a really fascinating fight earlier on in the season.
Well, they're only 64 points behind Red Bull, They're not massively out of it, but Jarno, what about the defensive performance that Leclerc put on today when he had, Piastri just behind him on much fresher tyres? I mean, I for one thought, well, Piastri should breeze past him given the pace that the McLaren had in this Grand Prix. Were you surprised that Charles stayed ahead?
I was a little bit surprised, because at some point I thought Piastri was gonna breeze past Leclerc and also breeze past Max. But I think something Piastri struggled with ever since he started in F1 is his tire management, compared to Lando at least. And by the time perhaps he catched up, his tire advantage was a little bit gone, which of course you need to pass around the track like here. I think you could clearly see at the start of the race that Lando was perhaps holding back a little bit because he knew he had the pace advantage. So just to make his own life easier, he takes it easy for 10-15 laps and then just waits until Max tires go off more. Because Max has to push more to do the same lap time. So that is something maybe Oscar has to focus on a lot. Maybe he doesn't know how to fix it. I'm not sure exactly, of course, what's going on. It must be frustrating that very often in qualifying he is on par with Lando. This weekend that wasn't the case, but in the race he clearly lacks compared to Lando, especially on tracks that have got decently high deck. And I think we're going to get that on the next few races as well. Monza is obviously resurfaced, so that's going to be a little bit new, but Baku is softest compounds available, a lot of traction zones, and just Singapore the same. So if he wants to challenge Lando in the future, he definitely has to work on that.
There's an interesting stat about Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris. We're talking about McLaren again briefly, but I agree with you about the tyre deg in the races. I feel Oscar has actually made a step forward this year compared to last year, but the stat actually that surprises me is 13-2 to Lando Norris in qualifying.
It's easy to forget because he looks so confident, Oscar, but it is his sophomore season. He's only into his second year of racing against Lando Norris, who is so highly rated. But yeah, that is a surprising statistic because in my mind, it's not that he's being trounced. That on paper is a trouncing, but I think that is probably not something I'd be particularly worried about if I was Oscar. If I'm 1 or 2 tenths off Lando in qualifying, I can probably live with that. I think it is, as Jarno was saying, that race pace issue that he's been working on with Tom Stallard, his race engineer, and it was much more pronounced in 2023. I agree with you, Tom. I think he's made a step this year, and then maybe this was just a little bit of a step backwards, but I feel like, and I hope for Oscar, that it's a blip more than a trend away from being on the race pace of Lando.
What about Mercedes then? They've won 3 of the last 4 races coming into the Dutch Grand Prix. I was expecting more.
It's a bit like they took the red cars from Saturday and painted them silver, and they took the silver cars from Saturday and painted them red. Because the Mercedes looked bang on the pace. Okay, qualifying was a bit of a disappointment for Mercedes, but not as pronounced a disappointment as I think it was for Ferrari. And then in the race, George Russell, speaking to the media after the race, just said they went backwards. They couldn't understand why. They just had no pace. Yes, both drivers made a switch to the 2-stop strategy. Both ended up on the soft tyre, which I don't think was the optimum strategy, but I think they were just rolling the dice, seeing what they could do to get in contention. But having been that form team going into the summer break and everybody going like, oh, the silver arrows are back, I think it was cripplingly disappointing for them to just be so off the pace on race day here.
What about the new floor? They tested it on the Friday of Spa and elected not to race it there. They did race it here. Am I joining the dots?
Could be that. Could be circuit specific, and again, a little blip. We've seen that with Mercedes in the past, that there's just been a bogey circuit for them. We see it with teams fairly often, that there's a circuit that just doesn't suit them. So I think let's wait until we get to Monza before we're drawing like proper conclusions.
Jarno, tell us about Zandvoort, because I think another surprising statistic is that for the last couple of years, Lewis Hamilton has struggled in qualifying at this track. And he did here this year. Okay, he then gets a 3-place grid penalty for impeding Sergio Perez in qualifying. So he starts 14th on the grid. But, he didn't get into Q3. What is it about this racetrack? Is it a particularly difficult track to tame? Because you've raced here. Admittedly, it was the old spec track, but the fundamentals of the Zandvoort circuit are the same.
I think it is because the corners are really, really long. I think he tends to struggle if the front doesn't bite as well into corner. When these cars, these tires, the front tires tend to really easily give up really deep into the corner. And yeah, that's what McLaren has nailed, because I was saying before, you want as much rotation as possible, but you do not want to sacrifice any traction for it or any consistency. And that's what McLaren has nailed. And yeah, these front tires struggle in such long corners. Tire deck was higher on the front left than on the other 3 tires, probably. I think that's why he struggled in qualifying to get the car rotated. I think that's what a lot of cars struggled with. Maybe Lewis, his driving style, struggled a little bit more with it. Not sure if that was the case. Of course, I can look into his head and.
It's logical what you're saying. He actually drove a really good race to go from 14th to finish just behind his teammate George Russell in 8th. So you can overtake here at Zandvoort, whatever people say.
Yeah. You can always not overtake until you can overtake, and then the drivers are happy when they can overtake. But yeah, he looked like he'd been having a great time out there. By the time he got into the media pen, it was as chirpy as I've seen Lewis Hamilton this weekend, for sure.
Now, another person I want to talk about is Pierre Gasly.
Yeah, I must say I enjoyed that race. Some good fun out there, good battles. Feels good to restart the second part of the year with some points. So
he comes home in 9th place, his first point since the Austrian Grand Prix.
Yeah, Gasly made some good moves this race. I think, if I remember correctly, Albon was a little bit nice to him in turn 1 when it was a little bit chaotic. I think at some point I saw like 5 cars within like half a second of each other. And Albon was a little bit nice into turn 1, giving him a lot of space. But then, if my memory serves correctly, he made another really good move into turn 1. Was perhaps on Hulkenberg.
He was the king of going around the outside of Tarzan turn 1.
Yeah,
you can sort of do. There is a high line. It's like an oval, isn't it? Almost.
Yeah. And his place was great as well. I'm not sure exactly what happened to Ocon, but he was quite far down. I think P15, if I remember correctly. So yeah, he did great compared to his teammate, and had great moves. So well-deserved 2 points there.
Early on in the race, Lewis Hamilton was just going through everybody like butter, basically, from his low starting position. But Pierre was the one he couldn't get past, and Pierre put up a really robust defence to keep Lewis behind for a number of laps. And yeah, he looked fantastic out there. But like you say, he's just seems to have an affinity with this track. Like Fernando Alonso as well, seems to do really well at this track. So
P10 today.
Yeah, Kevin Magnussen seems to go well at this track. I think it's maybe those drivers who like a bit of the old school feel of old school racing tracks. You have to remember that this track first appeared on the calendar in 1952, so it's pretty much as old school as it comes. So some of these drivers just really like that old school feel, and it makes them come alive.
Look, before we move on from Gasly and Alpine, I feel that there's been a bit of a reset over the summer break. Bruno Famin has left. Oliver Oakes has come in. Oliver Oakes, of course, has huge experience in motor racing. He ran the high-tech team, and they've got cars running in most junior formulas. I was surprised this weekend when I was just watching Ollie Oakes in the paddock. He already knows everybody here. I think I expected him to sort of be the new kid on the block who didn't know anyone. It was going to take him a while to get up to speed. But I saw Lando Norris go out of his way to go and say hi to him as if they were old mates. I saw him calling out to Fred Vasseur from the other side of the paddock as well. He knows all of these people, so I can see why Flavio Briatore, the executive advisor there, chose him. And then, of course, it was also this weekend that they announced that Jack Doohan, son of MotoGP world champion Mick Doohan, is going to be Gasly's teammate in 2025. Jack is, of course, a race winner in Formula 2. He's been Alpine reserve driver this year. He's doing some really impressive runs in FP1, and I caught up with him just before the race today to get his reaction to becoming a race driver.
To be honest, I'm still going to be on a high for a while. You know, I want to do well. I'm going to not leave any stone unturned, but for the sacrifices that I made, my family made, my father, my mother, everyone involved, and to be able now to have the opportunity to live out my childhood dream, you know, it's an amazing opportunity and amazing feeling.
Can you talk us through the moment? Who told you? What were you doing? Did you drop the phone?
I got told by an individual on Monday night, driving home in the car. On the Monday after Spa, I was testing Tuesday and Wednesday, and I got a phone call letting me know that I will be driving for Alpine next season, and that I will be a Formula 1 driver, full stop, which was very emotional. There was a lot of things running through, thinking back over all the hard times, the tough moments, that I've even been with you in the press conferences since the F3 days and my not so good days as well. There was a lot as well. I then had 3 weeks after that to digest it before the announcement. But also Bruno Famin sent me a message on Tuesday, and the message was basically helping me out with an announcement quote for my release, and that was his way of mentioning it to me. Very, very cool the way it came across.
So what happens now? Talk us through the build-up between now and when you're first testing the 2025 car. Are we going to see you do, for example, a lot more runs in the 2-year-old car, or what's the plan?
To be honest, my running in the 2-year-old car was always quite extensive this year, so we're going to continue with that. That I have a test day on Tuesday in Imola. I will have 2 further days in Abu Dhabi after Singapore, 2 days in Barcelona, a day in Qatar. So I'll have more running in the 2-year-old car. But at the moment, I still have a unique opportunity to continue evolving and helping with this car in the simulator off track, which will also help my chances of evolving my car for 2025. The more I squeeze, the more I get at this point in time and going forward. So I'm going to continue what I'm doing. I have a great opportunity, a unique opportunity to start things early with my, next year engineer and crew, which is, like I said, a unique opportunity. So I'm going to take it with open arms.
What kind of a team are you joining? Because we've seen more management changes. It's been a difficult start to 2024 for Alpine as well. They've improved the car a lot, but just tell us about I suppose it's an expectations question. What are your expectations given everything that's happened in 2024 to Alpine?
There has been obviously changes and a lot going on within the team, but they've all been changes with one goal in mind, and that's to get Team Enstone and get Alpine back to the front end of the grid. And, that's what it takes. And I feel like we've had a good shuffle. We've got the people we need in, and we've been going forward, and we're going to continue to do that. Well, that's the plan, and my expectation is that I'm an asset, and I can work well with my teammate to ensure that we make the car as fast as it can be while on track, and continue in this pipeline to hopefully get us to the pointy end of the grid.
You mentioned your teammate Pierre Gasly. Just how big a challenge does he present you?
To be honest, I haven't even thought of it in that perspective at all. I haven't thought too much about even the other side of the garage. I want to work at this point in time as one team. Utilize all the tools I have. Even I'm very close with his side of the garage as well, and those engineers. So my focus will be very far from Pierre. It'll be making the most of my on-track performance, my crew, my team, and working with him to make sure the car is as quick as possible. And I'm sure we'll both then be happy.
And you're going to be reunited with Oliver Oakes. You drove for Ollie in the junior formulas when he was at High Tech. Tell us about that relationship. Tell us about him.
You know, he's an exceptional guy. Brings a great atmosphere, great vibe to the team, which is important and which is what we need. We're gaining and let's say employing more and more good people, which can only help. I have a great relationship with him, working with him in the past. So it's he's starting his Formula One journey a little bit before me, but I'm so stoked to have him in the team.
So final one, you're going to be starting your Formula One career at home in Australia. Can you just give us a moment of what it'll feel like to be in Melbourne on the grid, about to start your first race?
Yeah, it's going to be a surreal feeling. You know, something like I said that I've dreamt of since a little kid, and to be having my debut Formula One race at home in Australia. You know, I know what that run down to turn 1 looks like. I know even from Formula 2 what it feels like sitting in the cockpit, you know, millimeters off the ground, staring at the lights before they go out. So, you know, I'm going to go over it in my head, you know, plenty of times before it actually happens for real. But, you know, it'll also be an important race to manage, you know, on track, but more importantly off track. Hopefully we'll have 2 Aussies as well to join me on the grid that can take the load off me. But I look forward to just enjoying each and every moment, not only of Australia, but for the rest of the year, and not looking ever too far ahead, just always at my next step in front of me and making sure that I cherish each and every moment.
Good luck with it. Thank you
so much. Jack has had some good results in F2. I would love to see him do well next year. I think it's going to be tough next to Gasly, of course. I think Pierre is a lot better these days than he was at Red Bull, of course. I think he has showed this year he can really take it to Ocon, for example, who is highly rated as well. So I don't think it's going to be easy, especially starting in Melbourne in front of your home crowd.
Yeah, no pressure.
No pressure against a really, really experienced teammate who dominated GP2 at the time, of course, which is Formula 2 now. So, yeah, I think it's going to be tough for him for sure. But yeah, I hope he does well, of course. So yeah, we will see.
He got the phone call just after Carlos Sainz had been confirmed at Williams. So he was like, obviously, you know, top of the list apart from Carlos.
Yeah, after what he called a mediocre dinner in Spa. So I'm sorry for his dinner. Yeah, and he admitted that it was hard with Carlos Sainz being the cork in the bottle, as he called it. And it was hard knowing that his future was basically in the hands of Carlos Sainz. But he also admitted that Alpine were, of course, perfectly within their rights and sensible to keep pursuing Carlos Sainz, who is a race winner, who has all that experience. And when it became clear that that wasn't an option for Alpine, then they made the next logical decision, which was to put Jack in the car, which he should be flattered by as well, because to be behind Carlos Sainz when there are a lot of other drivers with a good amount of experience that they could have put in the car, it's understood that they were tentatively having conversations with Valtteri Bottas about maybe making a move over there. So I think it's a vote of confidence in Jack, and he's very well set to try and repay their faith in him by doing as well as he can. To the point about Pierre Gasly as well, it's true that Pierre Gasly is a good yardstick for him, very experienced teammate, but I think Alpine will take confidence in how Pierre Gasly took Yuki Tsunoda under his wing at AlphaTauri, as it was then known, and really tried to bring Yuki Tsunoda up to speed. And I think Alpine will hope he has a similarly collaborative relationship with Jack Doohan.
That's a very good point. And Jack is the first member of the Alpine Young Driver Program to actually make it all the way through to Formula One. They almost made it with Oscar Piastri a couple of years ago, but of course, we know what happened there. Oscar went to McLaren. And look, speaking of Alpine, their driver Abby Pulling won the first F1 Academy race of the weekend here at Zandvoort. Dorian Pan won the second. But Pulling remains the favourite for the title. She leads the standings going into the next race, which is in Singapore in September. So just a couple of other things to ask you guys. Look, Williams. Yeah. Greg, you just on that sort of grimace face. This was a difficult weekend for them. They brought upgrades. Then Logan Sargent has that massive crash on Saturday, wiping out one lot of the upgrades. And then, of course, Alex Albon was disqualified from qualifying for a floor that was too wide.
It was slightly a calamitous weekend for Williams, and you don't like to see any of what befell them happen to any team on the grid. But to deal with the Logan crash first, very similar to his crash at Suzuka earlier this year in FP1, where he just seemed to, either from like his viewpoint in the cockpit, just not be able to see where the runoff curve became grass, put wheels on the grass and then spun around, and then disastrous effect on the car. All the upgrades seemingly wiped off, except I believe the roll hoop, and then the massive fire as well. So that won't have pleased team principal James Vowles. And then we had the news that Alex Albon's car had been ruled illegal for what it sounds like is a very minor measurement breach, which they managed to resolve. But it's given that James Vowles has managed to attract Carlos Sainz to the team by showing that they're moving, they're changing from the old Williams to a much slicker operation, it just looked a bit calamitous. The optics weren't great, as they'd say in communications and PR.
Yeah, I agree. Carlos won't have been impressed by what he saw there, but you know, James is very good at putting a positive spin on things in that we will learn from this. He said that their own measurements were that the floor was legal, so they've just got to sort of rectify the correlation issue between their measuring machine and the FIA's measuring machine. The FIA's measuring machine, of course, being the only one that really matters, because that determines whether it's legal or not. Jarno, I did want to ask you about Logan Sargent and just where he's at mentally, because he knows already that his seat at Williams is gone for next year. And then the first race back after that news, he goes and has a crash like that. I suppose it's a harsh question, but is there any coming back for him from that?
I think it's quite clear there's no coming back in Formula One. Of course, he's a really good driver, but unfortunately in Formula One, being a really good driver is not enough. You need to be the best of the best. Yeah, this was not a great weekend because the crash looked really clumsy in a session where there was nothing to win. You know, free practice drying up track. You're not really learning anything from that anyway. And yeah, to add onto that as well, it was clumsy because he just drove onto the grass basically when the exit was already done and caused a huge crash with new upgrades. So I'm sure he will do really well in wherever he goes next, but I'm quite sure it won't be Formula One.
Look, we're speaking a couple of hours after the checkered flag here in the Netherlands. There has been speculation today about whether Logan will see out the season. Helmut Marko has gone on the record as saying he won't stand in Liam Lawson's way if Williams offer him a drive for the last 9 races. You've got your ear to the ground, Greg. You're the news hound. What can you tell us?
Well, somebody asked me last night who I would put in, and I thought if, as speculation continues to build about Andrea Kimi Antonelli joining Mercedes for 2025, wouldn't it be a decent idea to put him in for 9 races at Williams, get up to speed, and then move him across to Mercedes? Toto Wolff has said he's had conversations with James Vowles, and they've decided that what they prefer is for Mercedes to prepare him the way they were planning to prepare him, which is for him to finish his Formula 2 season, for him to do his testing of previous cars program. But there's another driver at Mercedes, Mick Schumacher, and Toto said he would be cheering for Mick Schumacher to get that opportunity at Williams. He says it's for James Vowles to decide. And Toto is not going to be heavy-handed about persuading his former strategy director to take Mick Schumacher. But I think Mick would do a decent job. And, you know, Logan, you've got to feel for him because he's a really sweet guy. But, you know, it can't be nice to be told at this stage of the season that you're basically out and that basically the rest of the season is an audition for a drive elsewhere. So is that somebody that Williams want mentally in the car, especially if he's going to do damage to upgrades in the way that he did.
Do you think you say that Toto Wolff isn't going to champion Mick Schumacher, push for him to get in the Williams, but do you think Toto Wolff would push against Liam Lawson getting in that Williams because Liam is a Red Bull driver and perhaps Toto doesn't want him to learn all about the Mercedes power unit, etc., etc.?
Yeah, I think that could be a realistic concern. I think also it's a slightly strange situation for Helmut Marko to be in, because if Williams put that upgrade on and both drivers can keep it out of the wall and it can be deemed legal, would they want Liam Lawson and Alex Albon getting closer to RB and starting to take points out of them? Okay, it's not a very realistic issue at the moment, but who knows if they come on strong towards the end of the season. But yeah, it'd be great to see Liam back in a car. Helmut Marko, Christian Horner rode back from comments that Helmut Marko had said that he would be in one of the Red Bull family of cars in 2025. Christian Horner said actually what he meant was he'd be in a car in 2025 somewhere on the grid. We know it won't be a Williams, but it could be somewhere else.
I think we shouldn't forget as well that James Hall's obviously previously was with Mercedes, and he did choose Antonelli as a junior driver at Mercedes, if my memory serves correctly. And that could, of course, help as well. At the same time, in the position Williams is in, do they want to put a rookie in just for 9 races? That's a little bit tricky, I feel like, as well. But Antonelli is an insane talent, so at the same time, he could do really well. But yeah, that could have an influence, of course, that James does really like Kimi, having worked with him at Mercedes and being really impressed by him.
Well, look, if there is a change at Williams before Monza, it's going to happen very soon. Make sure you tune in to F1.com or the official F1 app to get all the latest from Greg and his team. Well, guys, it's been brilliant to have you both on the show. Thank you for your time. We always end it with our driver of the day. Lando, of course, got the vote on the TV. Jarno, who was your driver of the day in the Dutch Grand Prix?
I think I will give it to Gasly.
Just tell us a little bit more about why.
Made great moves, great pace, had some tricky moments during the race, and when it mattered, he did well and made the right moves, right decisions. So I'm going to go with Gasly.
Okay, Greg?
I thought of 4 candidates.
Hey, hang on. You can only have one. All right.
Okay.
Hang on. I've thought of 20 candidates.
I'm going to give Nico Hulkenberg a special commendation after a difficult weekend for doing a 57-lap stint and finishing just outside the points. But I think I will be dull and give it to the race winner, Lando Norris, because I felt like this was a sea change victory for him. I actually watched the race by watching the main screen, but also on F1 TV, just being on Lando's feed and listening to Will Joseph, his race engineer, in his ear. And Lando can sometimes be quite edgy with Will and get a bit stressed and a bit tense, especially if he's fallen back or had a setback. And Lando, over team radio, was so calm. He was almost back to that kind of jovial, funny Lando that we had in 2019 when he would occasionally, get a P5 or something and be really chuffed with that. But I felt it was a bit of a sea change moment for Lando, in which he became this person who knew he could just go out there and win the race. So Lando Norris gets the nod.
Yeah, and just it also proves just how much confidence he had in that car today. Well, I am going to say Charles Leclerc. So it's good that we've all come up with different people. For me, I thought that was one of the best races that I've seen Charles do for quite a long time. He's recognised, as a qualifier, and his qualifying stats are amazing. But actually, he's driving really good races for that team now. And so Charles was brilliant. It was his 7th podium of the season. And to go from 6th on the grid to 3rd at a track where you can't overtake, just look at the fact that, Piastri in a much faster car couldn't get past him. So well done to Charles Leclerc. So the top 10 looks like this. Lando Norris takes win number 2 of his career, and McLaren's first at Zandvoort since 1985. Max Verstappen finishes second, his worst ever result at Zandvoort, and Charles Leclerc takes his 7th podium of the season in 3rd. Piastri is 4th, with Sainz 5th and Perez 6th, his best result since Miami. The Mercedes of Russell and Hamilton are 7th and 8th. Gasly is 9th for Alpine, and Alonso takes the final point for Aston Martin in 10th. In the Drivers' Championship, Max Verstappen still leads the way, but Lando Norris has taken 8 points out of his advantage to cut it to 70. Leclerc is 3rd, 13 points ahead of Piastri in 4th. Then comes Sainz in 5th, Hamilton 6th, Perez 7th, Russell 8th, Alonso 9th, and Stroll 10th. And the Constructors' Championship is getting really tasty. McLaren have cut Red Bull's advantage to 30 points with only 9 races to go. Ferrari are 3rd, 34 points behind McLaren, and Mercedes are 4th. Then there's a whopping 202-point gap back to Aston Martin in 5th, with VCARB 6th, Haas 7th, Alpine 8th, Williams 9th, and Sauber 10th. Well, guys, that's it. We go to Monza next. New curbs, new asphalt, a slightly reshaped first chicane. It's very difficult to predict what's going to happen there.
It is, as we've seen this year many times. It's nearly impossible to predict who's going to be fast and who's not going to be. I think we can all agree McLaren will be up there again, but what the rest of the grid is going to do is really hard to say beforehand. And yeah, I think teams will be maybe surprised a little bit with the new asphalt. Obviously, previous data might not matter as much, so yeah, it'll be interesting.
They need a clean run in practice, don't they, all of the teams? Jarno, before you go, I've got this question that I've been dying to ask you, so I'm so pleased you're sat opposite me. Look, you are a phenomenal sim racer. You're a 2-time world champion. If you were to drive the RB20, how close, let's say round Zandvoort, you know this track, how close could you get to Max and Checo in the real car? Because, you know, you're a former race winner yourself, so you've done some track racing, but, you know, sim to get straight in the F1 car, go on, you must have thought about it.
I'll be much faster. No, I'm joking, I'm joking. No, I wouldn't be faster, of course. It's if I would be physically fit enough on my first day of driving, or how much practice do I get?
Greg, how long a test are we giving him?
I think we'll give you a day in the car. 1 day.
In a single day, I think I would be happy to be within a second for sure. It's so hard to say. When I did racing myself, of course, I was in the Renault F1 Junior team at the time. I was doing quite well, but yeah, now I look back at it. I'm so much better now after all those years of sim racing. At least I feel like I'm much better. I've learned a lot. It's so hard to say because these guys drive every week in these cars, 3 days a week pretty much, with how busy the F1 calendar is. So yeah, I think I'll be happy to be within 1 second. I want to say I'll be within a tenth, but yeah, it's really hard to guess. I've done some laps on the simulator at various F1 teams, and on the sim, of course, I was faster than the real F1 drivers, but that doesn't mean much in real life, of course. So, yeah, I've got no clue.
It's very impressive, all the same.
Yeah, I would be happy to be physically fit enough actually to drive a Formula One car for a day. I do some karting these days, and I've bruised my ribs multiple times already. So, I've had to take some breaks from that every now and then. But yeah, it's nearly impossible to know beforehand. Every track is very different, and probably on some tracks I will do better than others. So yeah, I'll be.
All right, we'll give you a second. That's good.
A second. Yeah, I would be happy within a second.
All right. Well, Jarno, thank you very much for your time. It's great to meet you and to have you on the show. Greg, thank you for coming back.
Thank you for having me.
There's a common factor about having you on the show. Every time we have you on the show, Lando Norris wins a race.
I will take that 10% from McLaren.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Look, great to have you both. Thanks for your insights. And do remember that you can get your tickets for the rest of this season for Austin, Las Vegas and beyond at tickets.formula1.com. And of course, as we've mentioned, it's a European doubleheader and we'll be back next Monday with our review of the Italian Grand Prix. Thanks for listening. F1 Nation is produced by Formula One and Audioboom Studios.